In this episode, we take a look at inner child work. We give you some different ways to work on this. We talk about the benefits of this work and even some signs you can look for to see if this work could be helpful.
Let's talk about what intuition really is.
Let's look at all the places intuition and ego show up in your life.
Let's share honestly.
Let's do the research.
I'm Jamie Hayhurst.
I'm Heather Wood.
This is the Intuitive Girls Guide.
Hey, Jay.
Hey.
Or should I say, hey, little Jay? Because we're going to talk about our inner child today.
That is what we call her.
Yeah, we do call your inner child Little J. She has a nickname. We will be giving tips, and giving them a nickname is one of them. Yeah. But inner child work is so fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really love it. And I think that we might have shocker, a slightly different perspective on some of it than some people do.
Yes.
So I think it'll be a fun topic.
Yeah.
And I think everyone can benefit from it, and it doesn't have to be this deeply traumatic experience to go in. You can do it in a light way. You can,
Right.
You can just sort of visit it when you want to.
Or if you have that sort of stereotype in your mind from, I feel like there was in the mid 90s, there came this stereotype that was I'm doing inner child work.
Yeah.
And
the
this
pretentious
sort of trope.
Yeah.
In movies and sitcoms and stuff.
Yeah.
So if you think it's this kind of corny, weird thing, hopefully
Yeah.
this episode will change your mind about it.
It almost would give off the vibe of being a really conceited, self-absorbed thing to do.
Yeah. So a way to not take responsibility.
Yeah, I am working on my inner child. Yeah, right. I mean, I can see some of that being accurate, but like anything, it's a really great tool for healing and understanding yourself. And I feel like if you want to get more in touch with that intuitive element of yourself, that real authentic, raw, intuitive version of you, that's your child's self. So it can be really helpful to just have an awareness of them.
And you're probably doing some inner child work without even realizing it already.
I mean, really, anytime you connect something going on to yourself now to something in your childhood, you're doing inner child work.
Exactly.
Yeah. You don't have to be laying on a couch with a psychologist, which I do recommend, actually, doing it with a therapist. I love that. But it doesn't have to be that.
Right.
Yeah. We tend to make stuff a little too dramatic in this industry of how you do the things.
Yep.
You don't have to go on a 3-week retreat to do inner child work. You can.
You can.
I would do that.
I think you should just do it all the time.
Exactly.
You should just be doing it all the time.
And again, another thing people don't like about us, Jamie, is
yes,
with this kind of work, anything intuitive, and this certainly qualifies as intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
It should be made more your day-to-day life, and not so much just speaking to the dead. You use it every day and every moment of your life to make your everyday life better and easier and more joyful.
Right.
That's the good stuff.
That's the work, right?
I think that's the real work.
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what is inner child work and where did it come from? Okay. The interesting thing about where did it come from is there's so many different opinions on this.
Okay.
It's, how there's a father of everything?
Yep.
Okay, interestingly enough, there's not really one father of this because it's sort of one of those things that this concept got floated and then it sort of took off over here and then it took off in this other direction. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to give you who I think can really be coined with starting it. And it not only in research can I see ties to it, but also in my opinion of this person, it makes sense to me. And that's Carl Jung. Okay. So if you don't know who he is, you should. He was a Swiss psychologist, psychoanalyst, also kind of a philosopher, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Really famous for kind of rewriting a lot of the stuff that Freud put out. So Freud wanted everything to be sexual.
Yes.
I don't know if you recall.
Yeah.
And so Carl Jung kind of came in and was I don't think so.
Yeah.
And he had worked with Freud and studied under Freud. So that's what Carl Jung is known for. He's also kind of very spiritual and holistic in his approach to all this stuff. So as you can imagine, back in the early to mid 1900s, that wasn't always like considered
Accepted,
credible.
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but really, really amazing. But if you hear someone else say so and so started it or it came from this, I don't think that they're wrong. I think
Right.
those are just different opinions.
Mhm.
And so many different people use inner child work in different ways with different viewpoints and different techniques. So the way that we're presenting it is certainly not the only way
Right.
it should be taken in or presented.
Yep.
I also was looking for a definition because, I love a definition to share with the class.
Yeah.
That was really hard because there were so many and I hated most all of them.
Oh.
So I made my own
Okay.
and I thought I'd read it to you. And Jamie, you could say what you think.
Okay.
Because you and I are big fans of inner child work. So I know
Yes.
you know how we both feel about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So my definition is becoming conscious of and addressing stories we created as children that we are still living by. They could be formed from unmet need, trauma, fear, shame, etc.
Love it.
Okay. There's a lot of people who are really caught up in like it has to be from a traumatic event and it
No.
has to be only based in like these like really big fear experiences. And I just think any kind of conditioning,
Yes.
any kind of story you tell about yourself, anything connected to fear as a child could have inner child work connected to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most things actually, when you actually start to do this, and you'll obviously lean towards like the big traumatizing events when you're starting out, but then as you start working at it, you're like, I feel this way about something and I don't have any memory as to why I feel that way, or there's nothing that stands out to me, or I don't know why I feel that way.
Yeah, I think we're really misled into thinking it's got to be a big trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that you and I like to work on and talk about with people are like the vows and those
Mhm.
things, like basically the stories you're telling yourself about yourself and about
And
the
the
world
world.
and about how to be safe and how to be successful.
Yep.
There's so much in there that can be holding you back.
Yes.
And so much of that comes from childhood and having an underdeveloped brain, having
Right.
to realize that the world you live in is fucking ridiculous
Scary,
and
right.
scary and out of control and
Yep.
chaotic. And there's so many things that fly against what feels right in your
Mhm.
being that you have to put up with. So of course you're going to have to create stories and some kind of like forced or an untrue logic to get through from
Right.
point A to point B. That's
Yep.
going to happen a lot. And so sometimes people will be like trying to work on some of these things and they're like, but there's nothing really big that happened. And that's normal. I would
Yeah.
say the majority of the things
Agreed.
that you've created are considered smaller, like little blips to you.
Yep.
But you just created some sort of story for yourself that's now affecting you as an adult.
Right.
So when I think about when you need like inner child work, like I was trying to think like how would you know there's something to like explore here or to
Mhm.
like look at these vows from childhood. I really tried to like sit in my body and feel it. So the
Mhm.
best I could come up with was like it feels like restrictions, almost like you're caged in some way. Like
Mm.
there's a desire that you kind of seek and want, but like you feel very stuck and restricted
Mhm.
in how you go about getting it.
Yep.
That's the closest I could get to what it feels
Yeah.
like.
That makes sense.
I do believe everybody feels these things differently, but I think if you think like, where do I feel like self-restricted, like
Yeah.
holding
Stuck.
myself back, or
Right.
not to be cheesy, but like not in the flow with what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah.
It feels clunky when you're trying to go for something.
Or even just like reactive. If you are
Yeah.
if you're having a reaction to something.
Yes, exactly right. So I think that when you're going towards anything in your life. And again, we talked about getting unstuck in the last 2 episodes that we did. So we talked about how it's not always like you're trying to become a billionaire or have these giant goals. You're just
Correct.
trying to meet your emotional needs most of the time.
Right.
And you attach ways to do that to
important.
it, which is life.
Right.
As you're going through that, there's these roadblocks that are going to come up.
Yeah.
Right. And these things that are making it difficult, or you feel like, why can't I get past this? Or you can't meet the feelings that you want to experience. And that is the perfect time to stop and do a little bit of inner child work,
Yep.
in my opinion.
Agreed.
I think oftentimes people do stuff kind of like we were joking in the beginning, where they're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do some inner child work, like unprompted,
Mm-hmm.
which as a person who enjoys growth, I get.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're going to get a little bit stuck unless you're like, oh, as I'm going along the way here, let me pull this in.
Exactly.
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
It's not like
Yeah.
this separate thing to go do.
No, exactly.
It's
right.
like, no, this needs to be something that you learn and then put into practice all the time.
Exactly.
Okay. So I think another thing that's a red flag that it's an inner child issue, like flagging to you, is when you start to create sentences in your head about the fact that you're too much or you're not enough.
Yes.
Those to
Yes.
me, those are popular feelings,
Yeah.
right? When it comes to being like, okay, I'm having trouble in this area, or I don't feel great about myself, or I don't feel great about doing this thing because I feel like I'm too much, or I feel like I'm not enough, and you feel both of those things. Everybody does, but
Mhm.
everyone has one they feel more than the other.
Right.
Okay, too much here. When that's present, it's a really big sign that your inner child is trying to get your attention.
Yeah, I think any like generalization that you're making,
Yes.
like I'm always this.
Yes, that's
It's
a great
always
point.
that.
Like when it's very
anything-
black and white
yeah,
like that.
I'm
Yeah.
too much. I'm too little. Anything that's like making a sweeping generalization is a flag that you need to like pay attention.
Yeah, even saying stuff like I'm always this or
Yeah.
I'm always that, or like really nailing yourself to a category.
Right.
It's definitely a sign that
Yeah. Because there's
This is
probably
present.
a lot of data in your brain as to why that's true.
a lot, and it most all of it has to do with you being a little kid and
Right.
other people's reactions to you and your perception of what was going on with that.
Right. And then like throughout your life, you probably have further examples of that thing that you felt as a kid that where you created that vow, and then you had instances in your life as you've gotten older that have reinforced that.
Yes, exactly. And it's, you look for things to reinforce it.
Correct.
Right?
Your
Like
brain
you
loves
create a
that.
story and then
Yeah,
you're like,
right.
this means that. And
Yeah,
it,
it's a
someone
see,
someone from the
told you
outside's
so.
like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
You decided that meant that, but yeah, that's what that feels like.
Yeah.
For sure. One thing that I think isn't talked about in this thing that I think is kind of popular right now is how much inner child work and stuff and issues affect your attachment style, which we have an episode on that. But just to remind people,
Yes.
it's like secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and fearful avoidant attachment.
Mhm.
Those are the attachment styles, and that's how you connect with other people.
Correct.
So the kind that you have is very much based on your experience as a child and how you were nurtured and how you were
Right.
raised and all that. Again, see our episode on that if you haven't listened.
Right.
But I see a lot of people talking about that without talking about, well, if you're going to work on those attachment styles, you're doing inner child work.
Correct.
They're not different. That's a form of inner child work.
Correct. Or maybe if maybe even like reparenting
Yes.
is
yes,
a great
yes,
word.
yes.
Like if
Yes.
child feels like too specific, like maybe something happened. I mean, I see a lot on TikTok about people like they call it like inner teen work.
Oh, yeah.
Like reparenting my inner teen. Like I'm not like a scared child anymore. I'm like an angry teenager,
Yep,
and I'm
yep.
like healing those parts of myself. But,
Yes.
like that's where those attachments were created there.
Yes.
So if you are attached to people a certain way and you're trying to fix that, that's
Yeah.
reparenting.
Yeah, and when people talk about doing like they're dealing with like their inner teenager, that's such a beautiful time to look at, because teenagedom,
Yep.
if I can like boil it down and oversimplify it, is like taking human behavior wise, is taking the truths you created as like a 6-year-old
Child, right?
and then playing them out to find out, to like reinforce or say like,
Adjust,
no, this
right,
isn't right,
Right.
adjust.
Yeah.
So like you're acting those things
Yes.
out
You're trying them on for size.
without any
Right.
conscious idea that that's what you're doing.
Exactly.
So that
That's
is,
a good point.
it's like double inner child work.
Exactly.
You're like,
Exactly.
you're dealing with those two things, and it's really valuable. So I think it's important to look at. It's also inner child work. I don't think I would describe inner child work as difficult, but I want to make sure that I acknowledge that it can be.
Mhm.
Because when you're doing inner child work, you're trying to like release or adjust or shift things,
Mhm.
you are going to fly right into the face of all your coping mechanisms.
True.
Okay, so
That's
they're
true.
gonna come up, and you're gonna go like, oh my god, like, but that's how I feel
Right.
safe, or that's how
Yep.
I get through that, or that's what I tell myself. Because
Right.
all of these like vows and stories are all coping mechanisms, and
Yes.
a lot of them don't continue to work, or they create a lot of shame where it doesn't need to be. You know what I mean?
Yep.
They're not. There's a toxic element to them. But I think it's important to acknowledge, because again, sometimes we act like it's just like a really fun time to do inner child work,
Right.
where you're gonna trigger some stuff.
Well, or it's for fun. Like if
Yeah.
you're doing the inner child work and you're not then like applying it and making changes, then it's for not.
Yeah, you're just like
Right.
learning a skill and not applying it to yourself.
Right. Like
which
you have
is-
to actually apply it to
Yeah.
your life and like change the way you're acting and feeling presently, not just back then.
Exactly. Not just going like, okay, I see that story.
Right.
Now to actually do the work part,
You have to Right.
apply it.
now.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And those coping mechanisms are going to be difficult to let go of, because there's going to be a lot of fear that comes up. So just make sure, I think that inner child work is safe to like try on your own, but you have to be in touch with yourself. If you stumble upon something that feels a little sticky, go get support with it.
Definitely.
Like, abort mission and get support. There's no prize for the person who did the most by themselves.
No, certainly not with this.
And you just get such a better perspective when someone else listens.
Yeah, you don't want to, like you said, you don't want to trigger anything or get more stuck because you've realized something or you figured out why you do one thing, but you then don't know what to do with it.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, a therapist would be a great idea.
Always a great idea.
If that's accessible to you, absolutely.
Yes. Yes. So the other thing is that I think any kind of work like this, but especially inner child work, is it's like another rung difficult if you are an avoider. So like if your nervous system enjoys flight, if it's fight, flight, or freeze, yours is flight.
Yeah.
This work is extra difficult for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you're fight, which I think we both happen to be, it's a little bit, I wouldn't say easier, but it's more natural to like head on go through the issue.
Yes.
If it's flight, if you're an avoider, just like a natural avoider, it's just how you're programmed, it's much more difficult because your nervous system thinks that it's way more unsafe to face the things. So you're going to have reactions where like you don't remember, or you don't want to.
You won't even start. It might be harder to even start the process.
Or you just make jokes to get around it.
Right. Yeah.
So the point is, it's not the same for everybody.
Right.
If that happens to be your nervous system's design, then it's going to be a little bit harder.
Yeah.
Still doable, but
Definitely.
good to know about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have to now address the issue that I don't think you hate talking about it, but I know it hurts your brain and it does a thing to you that when I talk about it, that makes you squidgy.
Okay.
And that is time.
Okay. I've prepared for this moment.
You are ready.
Yeah, I've figured out why it's okay for me.
Really?
But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll say it and then I want you to share with the class. Okay. So when you look at time as a construct, we have many episodes on this too. So go ahead and listen if you want to hear me freak Jamie out when I talk about time. Like that's been recorded. You can listen. But you have to look at it the way your subconscious sees and deals with time. And it does not see time as linear.
No.
Okay. It sees it as a circle.
Right.
So before you're like, I can't do this podcast anymore, this is crazy, just bear with me for a second because there's an important
Or your
reason.
brain's like, oh, maybe we should go get a snack or go to the bathroom. It's because you're in flight.
Your avoidant personality type has
brain's
risen.
like, take a break.
Bear with me though for a second. When you're dealing with like any sort of, kind of energetic wound that you're, or thing that you're trying to heal, especially with your inner child, it's, even though it happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago, it doesn't matter, 10 years ago, your body, your like subconscious, if it's still affecting you, sees it as presently happening to you.
Correct. You've said this before in the episodes. I think it's profound.
Okay. So it doesn't know. So that's why like when some intuitive people such as myself go in to do this work, it's difficult to know a timeline. Like we have to figure that out but we know where to go because it looks active. Like, does that make sense?
Yes.
Like
in the body, in the energetic body.
Yes.
Right,
your subconscious isn't going like this happened on the timeline back at that dot.
Correct.
If it's still active in your system, it looks like it's happening to you right now.
That's also why you want to throat punch somebody when they say, like, that was 20 years ago, get over it.
Exactly. Exactly. But I think that further speaks to the point too that like it's okay to get support in working through this.
Absolutely.
You're like don't beat yourself up for being still very affected by something that happened to you a long time ago.
Agreed.
Because if it's again unhealed, we have an episode on that. Like if you haven't like worked through it or rewritten the story, it's going to show up as active in your system.
Correct.
Which also means that you are emotionally reacting to it as if it's active still.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Fear understands that it's in the past, but the rest of your system does not.
No, and your brain wants to make sure you're safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Well, tell me first, because I want to take a break, but I want to know why you're suddenly okay with me talking about time.
Well, it's interesting because, or maybe not time as a whole construct.
Okay.
That's still a problem. Like we're talking about time travel and stuff like that. That's still a problem.
Yeah.
But thinking about like carrying wounds and traumas with you.
Yeah.
It's funny because before you even said that we were doing this topic,
Yeah.
I heard in a book I was listening to, like not a woo woo book, like it's like a vampire book. Like it was like a fiction book. But someone in the book said something to the effect of like, we carry around all the times in our lives that we've lived and all the experiences we've had, we carry them with us to this day. And it was something like, they said it better than that. But I remember thinking like, that's why things still hurt. And that's why they still feel real, is because they are still real. I mean, so I basically, what I did is I took the science out of it. So it's more like a visual for me of like, oh, this thing happened to me.
Yes.
25 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's a long time.
Yep.
But like, I'm still carrying it with me.
Yes.
It's still like on my person. It's still in me. And so like, so it still feels live. It still feels active.
Yeah. And,
you know,
and I think that's a great way to say it, because you'll look back and you'll go, this thing happened to me.
Right.
But I don't feel so affected by it now. But like, maybe if you're like, on this, like have some sort of scale of what's worse or harder, that one was right. Or there's this little element to it that like still sticks with you, and you're like, why? What is that? And it's simply just that the story hasn't been adjusted. So if you decided that like this difficult thing happened to you, and in order to get through it, you had to look at the world like this. Like for me, an example is like I like to try to control everything because a difficult thing happened to me and it felt very out of control. So I still to this day feel safer when I can control and be in control, and feel unsafe when I'm not. So but that's not true. I'm not any safer when I'm controlling things, and I'm not unsafe when I'm not controlling things. Right. And it could create and does create problems for me sometimes. Right. But you could look at that and you could say like, oh, but you've healed from this part of that terrible thing, but you're still trying to control stuff. Like, why did you keep that? And it's because I haven't fully let go of the story that I'm safer if I'm in control.
Correct.
I haven't fully healed that. And and it doesn't
probably
mean
never will.
I was just going to say that I probably will never. And I think I get better and I get more aware, and it gets a little easier to let go of every time I have to deal with something like that. But I don't have to have like completely let it go, is my point, because I'm still carrying some of it because it made me feel safer. It helps me cope. Right. So it's kind of just about like awareness and not being so judgmental to yourself that you're like, why am I still like, you're all the things that shaped you, the good stuff that shaped you, you're carrying that too. And that's with you. So,
and I think we're also carrying, I think like what that quote was, what I read was that you also carry those versions of yourself.
Yes.
So like that, like the reparenting, like, or the inner child stuff, like you're not like going back. It's not like you're going back and like finding this little kid version of yourself. Like they live in you. Like, those are still parts of you. So parts of your psyche, parts of who you are, that like the 40-year-old version of myself from 5 years ago still lives in me. I still remember her experiences and her feelings. I still remember all those things. So like you carry them with you as you live and go on in your life. And so like that's why inner child work works, is because you can access it. you still remember those feelings. You still remember those experiences. So they're accessible to you.
Exactly right. The way I try to think about it is sort of in the same way that you play different roles and like you never aren't
Right.
the role. So like I might
Right.
be like mothering, like I might be with my kids and have my mom hat on.
Yes.
And then I might leave and be doing something and I'm not with my kids and I'm with my friends or something.
Right.
And the mom hat might not be on.
Correct.
But it doesn't mean that I'm no longer a mom or in the
Right.
mom role. It still exists. It's just not at the front.
Right. And so there's still a hat somewhere on the rack that's of like a
Yes.
scared 6-year-old who is
Yes.
out of control.
Exactly
And that hat
right.
gets put on sometimes.
Yes. And the
Right.
point is that your inner self, your subconscious, as I call it, some people say unconscious, right? Like all of that and your energetic body all don't know or have the statement in them that it's like this isn't happening anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it in a way it still is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I know that's a little trippy.
Right.
But it's important to understand when you do this work. Otherwise you're going to go in
I mean, that's
really misled.
That's the premise of inner child work. You have to
Exactly.
understand that part or it's not going to make any sense.
Exactly right. Okay, so I have some ways I thought we could work on it, and we'll share a little bit of our own inner child stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we should take a quick break first,
Okay.
and then we'll come back and we'll go through that.
Okay.
We'll be right back after this short break. You know what goes great with podcast listening?
A great cup of coffee from a great coffee shop.
Yep, beans roasted in-house, amazing baristas. You know where I'm talking about.
Restoration Coffee. Can we go?
Yes, I need an Americano and maybe a panini too.
Ooh, I need blueberry maple latte and probably a resto bowl.
Ooh, yeah, check them out and visit restoration-coffee.com.
Let's talk about what we're obsessed with this week. All right, Heather. I'm obsessed with Beetlejuice. Still, speaking of inner child work, I was obsessed with Beetlejuice
Well, I was thinking
as a child.
I hadn't connected it when we talked before the episode about what you don't always tell me what the obsessed is going to be, but you did tell me about this one.
Yeah.
And I actually, like, as we were talking, connected that, like, you oftentimes reference Lydia Dietz when you're doing inner child work.
Yes.
So it's all connected.
100%. And you saw the movie and then I saw it last night.
Yeah.
And I just think that I know a lot of our listeners are probably big Beetlejuice fans. And
Yeah.
and you know, you can share your opinions without giving anything away. But
Yeah.
like I think it's really interesting to see like that intuitive goth moody girl archetype
Yeah.
in theaters, and I think it's really interesting to see her now
Yes.
as an adult
Agreed.
in the second movie.
Agreed.
And you weren't thrilled. I mean, don't give anything away, but
I won't give anything away, but I did not like, first of all, I'll say I liked the movie.
yes.
My biggest problem was what they did with the Lydia Dietz character.
Right.
I felt like they made her kind of weak.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
And I don't want to say too many things because I don't want to spoil anything,
Yeah.
but like the ending they chose for her and the sort of like neurotic, weak, being taken advantage,
Intuitive person.
intuitive person, I was bummed about that.
yeah.
It was just like another, like, to me, she was like an empowering, cool
She was so
character,
cool,
which
yeah.
I think a lot of girls who felt
Mhm.
like weirdos as kids, like the two of us,
Right.
related to.
Yes.
And so to some of us, she's like a little bit heroic.
Yeah.
I didn't like what they made her
Yeah.
in the next movie.
I mean, Jenna Ortega sort of took the torch on that. Like, she
Yeah.
was the cool, empowering one in this movie, but
but it's always, why does it always have to be like the really young girl? Like, why can't
I
we
know.
see more empowering, cool, older women?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. So that was it. But I mean, I think Michael Keaton is awesome.
I mean, and it was like fully like campy,
It was
glorious,
Yes.
funny, like silly.
Yeah.
I think the like different styles and mediums they used in the movie was
Yeah.
so entertaining. Like
Yep.
I there's like a whole part where Beetlejuice speaks in like a different language and
Yeah.
there's subtitles and stuff. Like
Yeah.
it was fun.
Yes, it was
fun.
It was
Yeah.
weird, like what you would expect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what did you think? Like, did you have any issues like me?
No, I didn't. I
Okay.
mean, I was there for like the fun of it, and
Yeah.
I also really wanted to love it. So like I was not going in with like a critical eye.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
right. Well, you can't go into a movie like that being like, "Come on, why is this so campy?" I mean, that would be silly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely parts of it that I think like most movies, there are misses in every
Yeah,
part of
right,
it.
right, right.
Like, but like overall, I really liked it a lot. I
Good.
was really happy.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I would like to know if other people shared my opinion on what they did with
Same.
Lydia. And I'm sure a lot of people disagree. They probably liked that. And,
yeah.
and that's, everyone has their own opinion. I just get really sick of the tropes in movies of like
Correct.
the weak woman and like the older woman who's a hot mess, like who needs like her teenage daughter to save her. Like,
Yeah.
and a few
I
other
hear
things
you.
I can't mention that some of you are thinking if you've
Right.
seen it. But
Exactly.
I'd like
But let
to
us
know.
know what you think.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Sure. Okay.
All right, let's talk about the different ways to do some inner child work.
Okay.
And again, just to reinforce, highly recommend you do this with like a therapist or a trained professional,
Yes.
a coach, anybody like that that knows about this is a great idea. But this is just some ideas to get started.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can certainly do some digging in your mind. Like
Yeah.
even just, I bet it will start happening as you're listening to us talk about it. That's why we're giving examples, is because you'll start like doing your own processing on it.
Yeah.
You can do that. That's fine. You don't have
Yeah.
to call a therapist for that. But if it starts to feel like
Exactly.
if you start to feel like you're overwhelmed or it's too much or like it's a little too scary, absolutely get help.
Yeah, and not trying to scare you. It's sort of
No.
like the same as like go check out astrology, but then go pay a licensed astrologer, someone who knows what they're doing,
Exactly.
to give you more information. Like
Exactly.
that's just a great way to handle anything.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So as you can tell by how Jamie and I are talking about inner child work, probably gathered this already. You sort of want to think of your inner child as like a separate entity.
Yeah.
Okay. So same as maybe you would conjure up speaking to an angel or pulling in a spirit, like along the same lines. And yes, it's you, but it's really helpful to sort of create like the character that you can interact with.
Because when you do that, you can see it like more from a clearer perspective.
Yeah.
Because you're not projecting your current self onto it. Like
Exactly.
like when you're digging and asking questions about it, why do I feel, why does my inner child feel this way or that way?
Mm-hmm.
You take some of the biases out when you see it as like a different entity.
Exactly right. You know, we've talked a little bit about we've like referenced the IFS, like internal family systems, which
Yes.
I have on our list to maybe do an episode about.
Yeah.
If people would like to know that.
And Glennon Doyle did an episode on that of their podcast. We Can Do Hard Things.
Yes.
Her and Abby and sister.
I made you listen to it.
Yeah. No, it was good.
Yeah. So I think when you look at these different sort of modalities like that, like inner child work, they are encouraging you to create sort of a character. And even when you're doing work like you're trying to pick like the state you should be in when you're doing different things, or you're trying to deal with an issue, like I think of like my inner critic has its own character. And it just makes it a little bit less abstract. Like it's concrete in front of you and you can deal with it and you can speak to it and you can like see it as separate from yourself, which is very, very helpful in doing this work.
Agreed.
If you're just trying to talk to yourself like you're a little kid,
right?
Like it's not gonna be effective.
Right, because you're gonna keep correcting yourself, like, no, I don't really think that, or no, that's not really true, or that's not how the world works, or whatever. Like whatever you would say to yourself at the current moment, you wouldn't say to like you as a 6-year-old.
Exactly.
You'd probably be kinder.
You'd be way kinder
to a 6-year-old. That's
so much kinder.
That's the thing.
I mean, even when you're doing any kind of work with somebody and you're asking them about something, and then you sort of switch perspective and be like, all right, if you could talk to someone else who was going through that, or like if you could imagine that version of yourself in front of you, you could travel back in time and talk to her. That's easier to do than to do it with your current self. So I think it psychologically makes sense.
Agreed.
A great thing to do is to picture yourself, and even like have an actual picture of yourself around the age of 6. This is the age that we've talked before about how like your ego is developing. So it's great. Maybe
Yep.
you relate more to a picture of yourself at 8 or 5. Like that doesn't
10,
matter.
right.
Yeah, it's fine. But somewhere as close to 6 as you can get, at least to start, I think is good, because that's when a lot of the writing of these things was starting to trigger.
Right.
Okay. It's kind of like the
Yep.
origin, the
Story,
villain origin
right,
story
exactly.
of all of these things for
Yeah.
you. So having an actual picture is really, really helpful. Now, depending on what your top clairs are, it's going to be different. So some people, it's like the name. So we talked about having a nickname.
Yep.
That's more important than the picture. For some people, it's like having a certain memory that they can sort of like sit in and experience. Like I say, grab all of those tools and see
what
which one,
sticks,
like
right.
use them all and
Yep.
then like lean more on one
Yep.
of them.
Yeah.
But having a nickname that's not just your name. So like I'm not going to call my inner child Heather.
Well, no, certainly not if you're like working with someone else. It's hard to differentiate what you're talking about.
Yes.
Right.
But like having something so that just the words and the vibration and the naming of it
Yes.
helps you actually deal with it and assign things to it. That's just how your brain is designed.
And that's how you activate the state of doing the work.
Exactly.
Right.
We call yours little J.
Yep.
We are less creative. We call mine little Heather. I
Yep.
mean, little, you can be
whatever.
Maybe you had a nickname
Yeah.
as a little kid that, isn't really said now.
Yep.
Like all of that would
That's a good
work.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just pick one that feels right.
Mhm.
You can come up with one you never had but you like. It doesn't matter. As long as it feels intuitively right to
Yeah.
you, that's going to help. So what you're doing now is you're going to start to speak to them and acknowledge them, but I want you to like literally picture giving them a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Like, welcome to our life.
Mm-hmm.
You now have a seat. So you now have a say. You
Yep.
now can react to things. You now can like put your 2 cents in
Mhm.
for how we run this life.
Yeah.
Here's your chair. Sorry it took us so long to give you one. That is the first thing that you need to do.
I like that.
It's not just, in my opinion, it's not just finding it and seeing what their issues were.
Mm.
If inner child
Mhm.
work is appealing to you, if
Mhm.
stuff's coming up for you from your childhood, it is your inner child asking you for a seat at the table
Yes.
because you have not given them one,
Correct.
or you haven't given them enough of one.
Or you haven't trusted them to have one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're going to have to start asking them about their own needs.
Yeah.
And I know this might sound cheesy or like a lot of work, but what's happening if you're drawn to this work, again, if stuff's coming up from your childhood, if you're drawn to any sort of like healing or growth, what's happening is they're trying to get your attention.
Right.
And inside of you, there's like a battle happening or a thing going on that you're not being super conscious of.
Right.
Or you're not realizing it's like your childhood self.
Right.
And so you're operating without that information. Whereas you could just go like, what are your needs? And you won't always get an answer.
Right.
But if you could start to go like, oh, interesting, like inner child feels drawn to this or needs this. How
Right.
weird. Like that's where you want to start.
Right. But even if it's not them saying like, hey, I have an opinion of like, hey, I want a voice. It could be that whatever that programming is so loud from them. Like they're so scared of whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They sense danger in what you're doing, but you currently don't sense it.
Yep.
So that's where the resistance comes up, is like, you're like, well, why am I acting like this about something? Or why do I feel this way about this thing or whatever? It's because whatever that old programming is sending up a red flag.
Exactly.
And so you need to figure out like, why is my body telling me this is scary?
Yes.
Or this isn't safe, or I shouldn't do this, or why is it telling me to do these bad, like unhelpful behaviors?
Right.
Because something happened, like you wrote that way back when.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to figure out and give that inner child a voice to say like, hey, we don't want you doing this. This feels real scary.
Yep.
You did this once and it scared the shit out of us, or whatever that story is. You know?
We wrote a story that the bad thing that happened was because you did this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Like when you still like grapple with control over things.
Exactly.
Like, your frontal cortex knows you don't have to know everything all the time and be always in control.
Yes, of course it does.
But like little Heather's going like, no, get control.
Right.
Like
we
remember
need
that control. Remember that thing?
That's how we keep us safe.
Right.
Right.
So when you let her come up to the table and go, hey, I think you should consider getting some more control around here.
Yep.
You can then easily go, oh no, I think I've got this.
Yeah, or you
Do
can
you know what I'm
go,
saying? Like,
why is my inner child shouting at me for control? What do they
right,
actually need? Because I know that's a conditioned thing.
right,
That's a fear response from my inner child. So
right,
if they're reacting in a need to control, then there's some kind of chaos they're afraid of that my intuition is clearly asking me for.
right,
So now you have all this
right.
data to go
Exactly.
with. And just because you give your inner child a seat at the table doesn't mean you need to listen to her all the
You
time.
just consider it.
Yeah, sometimes you should.
And then she doesn't have to yell as loud.
Yeah. She doesn't have to try to take you out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because she'll put on all the brakes
Yeah.
if she feels like she has to.
Yeah.
But if she's got a seat at the table, you're listening to her and considering what she's saying,
Yeah.
then she doesn't feel like she has to scrap as hard
Yeah.
to get your attention.
And you sort of referenced earlier like the inner teenager work.
Right.
What I think is really significant is that like at some point when you were a teenager,
Mhm.
you told your inner child to shut the fuck up
Yep.
and don't talk to me anymore.
Yeah.
And you hurt her
like,
so
get it
bad.
together. Right.
And you removed her seat from the table
Yep.
because you were afraid of her.
Yep.
Okay. You were trying to become an adult.
You had to act a certain way. Look a certain
Exactly
way.
right.
Yep.
Exactly right. And you started blaming
Mhm.
her for shit that wasn't her fault.
Mhm.
And so she's caged. She's stuck. That's that restricted feeling I
Right.
was telling you about. So
Yep.
you owe her. Get her back
voice,
here
right.
and give her a seat, because at that point you did that to her. And it doesn't mean you like get mad at your inner teenager. This is a cycle that all human beings go to. But
Right.
in the healing, in becoming an adult, at some point it's going like, oh, we need to fix this.
Right.
We need to to change this because we don't need her caged anymore to grow. Now we need her free.
Yep.
Okay.
And at the risk of sounding like super like woo woo and like
Well, it comes
weird,
out of us sometimes because
this-
we are woo woo.
and this topic is very
Yeah.
much like that. Like,
Yeah.
I can't continue to translate it into like
I know.
regular talk, but like once you give your inner child or your inner teen or whoever a voice,
Mhm.
then you are going to feel like you have more of a voice.
You're going to feel so much more powerful.
So much more powerful, because when you're shutting up those parts of yourself,
Yeah.
you're shutting up those parts of yourself.
Yes.
So you're constantly being like muzzled, part
Yeah.
of you, right? Like this
Yes.
part of you
yes.
is being muzzled this whole time. And so when you allow those parts of yourself to have a voice, even if they're not winning every vote,
Mhm.
but if they're getting a chance to speak, then you feel more powerful and you feel like you have more of a voice.
Just to add on to that, because that's so profound, like to add on, I also, when I give all those pieces of myself a voice, and especially my inner child,
Mhm.
I feel more like my authentic self.
Yes.
You know that feeling of like, this doesn't feel like me. Like it does, but it feels like I'm going through the motions of being
Mhm.
myself. Like
Yeah.
oftentimes I feel like I'm pretending to be an adult, but I'm really a little kid.
Right.
And I'm like, one of these times people are going to catch
Gonna
on.
catch on.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
But that's to me like a signal that like, oh, my inner child isn't really present in what I'm doing if I
Right.
feel that way. Because
Because you've covered it up.
when
You've
she
masked
is, I
it.
don't feel like that.
Right.
You know, sometimes I feel like a weirdo. Well, I always feel like a weirdo, but like, like maybe
Right.
a bit misfitting, but
Yeah.
like it feels so much better
Exactly.
when you make peace with that. And
Yep.
like they get to kind of pop out sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Do something you enjoyed as a child.
Mm.
Have something in your life that you also did as a kid. And this is a try a
Mhm.
bunch of weird shit and figure it out thing.
Mhm.
Okay. So one of the things that I used to do as a little kid was be like collect stuff. Like I loved a collection. And this is like a thing a lot of little kids do. They collect rocks or they collect stickers, or there's something to the gathering of creating mine. If
Mhm.
you did that, do it again.
Yeah.
Like, you can collect something different if you don't want to collect whatever, or
Right.
go collect just do it to like connect with your own inner
Yep.
child. But
Yep.
like whatever it is, like to me, when I'm trying to like conjure up my inner child, I'm just gonna go like wander outside.
Mhm.
That feels like her to
Right.
me. So like it doesn't have to be, but like find a thing that's that.
Yeah.
And go do it.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Also, like, think about yourself as a kid, and like, what did you do with your days
Mhm.
before you had to go anywhere? If you had those kids' days where you had open days in a row, what were you doing?
Mm.
Figure out a way to do a form of that. It's going to help you. Me, I was like outside using my imagination either with people or by myself.
Yep.
Okay. So I know to do that because if my inner child was drawn to that, this really raw, intuitive part of myself knows that there's a lot of met desire when I do that.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Because that's what little kids are. They're just like reacting to desire all the time.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think you did with your days? I'm guessing it was similar to mine.
It was similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like wander around in the woods and play outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Stumble into friends.
Yep.
Use your imagination and
Yep.
then go home. Yeah.
Exactly.
Hey, we had so much to talk about when it comes to your inner child that we decided to make this 2 parts. So tune in next week when we continue our discussion on inner child work.
Hey everyone, Heather and I have an ask for you. If you love this episode or if you love the IGG, can you do us a favor? We need you to go onto whatever platform you listen on and download, subscribe, like, love, whatever it's asking you to do. Can you go do those things for us on the platforms that you listen on? It would mean so much to us.
Thanks for listening to our episode. For a way to get in touch with us, please visit our website, intuitivegirlsguide.com. We love hearing your feedback on our episodes.